Start recording. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, as mentioned earlier this morning, this entire week, Mr. Olivier decided that he was going to show you how to do the exact same problem that we've been discussing this morning, as well as start off on Monday, the vaccination problem, but using only single variables rather than arrays. And your practical will entail having to do that with single variables only. And I did ask, well, how many of you were not so pleased with the fact that you had to work with single variables only? And generally, I think many of you were like, no, it's cool. You don't have an issue with that. But I think at the end of the day, it's still not great. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you today how it is done. And that is not to say you don't learn anything from this experience, but rather to learn to appreciate and understand if you were working with single variables, what are your options and what are your restrictions, and what might be easier rather than working with arrays. Okay, so the first thing you need to realize is that, as I've mentioned this morning, is that if you're working with single variables, you can't give your users choice. In other words, your users can't then specify, listen, I only have so many days, I only have so many vaccines. If they want to do that and you're working with single variables only, then you would have to ask the user to let you know in advance so that you can make changes to the code and then compile it again and give them the new version of the program. So you can imagine that that is horribly, horribly non-flexible as far as programs are concerned. Can you imagine you being the developer on a program like this, and every time your user goes, oh, this needs to change. Can you change this from 2 days and 3 vaccines to 3 days and 5 different vaccines? And then they come back to you after and say, no, it's actually only 1 vaccine now because they've destroyed all the Pfizer vaccines because they've all expired and we're only doing Johnson & Johnson, but it will be 6 days. Okay, but that's the first thing you have to just see. So with this program, I want you to compare it with the program that we worked with this morning, the version that you've got uploaded. That one gives you the option to specify how many days and how many different types of vaccines. Here, no, you can't. There's no way for you to do so. All right. Okay, I just want to quickly check online to see. Nope, no comments still. Okay. All right. So in our design already, we will do our usual things. So, okay, with my form, what do I need? I need my UJ grid. You agree? Regardless of whether it's single variables or array, you are working with a UJ grid because you're using the UJ grid to display the information that we want, as in this morning. The difference is we already know how many rows and columns there will be because the user can't change this. Okay, so we decided for this program, let's do it the way we did it for the university, which is the university ran the vaccination day for 4 weeks, pretty much every week this month. So let's say there were 4 days, vaccination days. And let's say that in terms of vaccination, there are 2 vaccinations because we've got J&J and Pfizer. So with that in mind, we need to then think about the UJ grid, how many rows and how many columns there are, because we don't need to program it. We can specify it here. Okay, so I'm going to call my UJ grid GRD, and what I like to do, and this is again just showing you my personal preference. If you watch the video of the tutorial from Tuesday, you will see that Mr. Olivier did it differently. But I tend to prefer to name my grid in such a way that I specify the row and then the column. What type of information goes into row, what type of information goes into column in my UJ grid name. And the reason for doing so is that it constantly reminds me which are my rows and which are my columns, so that when I'm programming and specifying which row and which column, I know that, yes, rows are this, columns are that. Now, this morning, we specified in my example that we were going to use days for my rows and my vaccine types as my columns. You can swap it around if you want to. Why? Because the question didn't say what you have to specify as rows. In the semester test, and yes, I'm already talking semester test too, because we you know, it's not too early to start talking about it. In the semester test, the chances of you being allowed to choose is very rare. More than likely, you will be told these must be rows and these must be columns. All right. So I am trying to simulate this as much as possible to the same as the array version. And so I am going to keep this as rows are days and the vaccine types will be my columns. So I'm going to go days type. All right. And that's just to remind me. Yes.
Is this attendance or just the screen?
Oh, right. Sorry, I don't know what. Oh, right. Okay. Yes. Thank you for pointing it out. I'm like, oh, what? There we go. Hopefully now everyone is like, surprise! Now you can saw this happen. Magic. Thank you for pointing out. I'm like, okay. Right. Okay. I just want to quickly check online people. No, still no chats that I can think of. I can see notice. Okay. So there's my UJ grid. I just chucked the UJ grid on there. But we have to think about how many rows and how many columns. Okay, now we already specified that there will be 4 days and 2 vaccine types. And remember earlier this morning, we worked out how many additional rows and columns there should be. So we do remember it, and it will be the same, obviously, in terms of +2 plus 3. So over here, I can then specify already right at the beginning, because we know it's fixed. We can specify the rows and we can specify the columns. So we go to the rows over there and we say the rows is, remember, rows are my number of days, which is 4 plus 2, because 1 for the heading and 1 for the total. So in other words, this will be 6 rows in total. All right. And in terms of columns, so I'm going to go up to columns. Over here, remember we have 2 columns for the 2 different vaccine types plus 3. 1 for the heading, 1 for the total, and 1 for the average. So that would be 2 plus 3. That gives us 5. Because it is fixed size, all right, as in this isn't going to change. Do I have an excuse to leave my UJ grid like this? No, we don't, because is this going to grow additional rows all of a sudden? No. So I would then tend to do this instead. Now, is this still any professional looking program? You know how many columns there are going to be, right? So does it make sense for you to go scroll? Only, ladies and gentlemen, if it's many columns. Okay, does that make sense? Because if it were like 100 columns, then you'd be like, we're going to leave the scroll bar in. Because how are you going to have a form that goes and accommodates 100 columns? Does this make sense? Okay, now I'm also going to quickly take a look. Online people still don't seem to be chatting. Online people, are you awake, alive? Say something, please. So that I know you are there. Okay, great. Okay. So I am then deciding, oh, that makes sense that I drag this out and I have the entire number of columns specified here, like that. Because you can fit it on a screen. It makes sense to leave it like this. Okay? All right. Then the other thing I need to do is, obviously, I need to specify the buttons, because buttons make this program do the things it does. So I am going to add in a few of my buttons. So I've got a button, and this first button is going to be meant for, okay, now earlier this morning, you remember how many buttons there were? There was a button for initialization, all right? There was a button for setting up the program. So initialization, in other words, setting up the program. That's one button. Then I had a button for reading in the data. Then I had a button for calculating the total per vaccine type. Then I had a button for calculating the total per day. And then I had a button for calculating the average per day, right? So there was 5 buttons. Do you think I need 5 buttons in this program here? Okay, you reckon no. Why not? Okay, I'm going to look in online and see if there's anyone that's going to say anything. Oh, yes. Okay. Okay, well, one person's very dead, and then yes, yes. Any ideas why we only have, well, we don't have 5 buttons. I'm just saying we don't have 5 buttons, but if it's not 5 buttons, what is it? 1 button? Okay, I'm going to leave the very dead online people to think about it, and then I'm going to go back to the screen. Okay, wait, someone said something? No, because we have fixed arrays of vaccination days and type. So yeah, RJ Matuba. So the question then is for the physical people, how many buttons do we need? Okay, I've got 1 button so far, and some of you might be like, oh, can I just stick 1 button and be done? No, that's terrible. Don't do that. Have multiple buttons, because the idea is if you press a button, you want something to take place, remember? And it makes it easier for you to debug your programs if something goes wrong. Because if you have 1 big button, you just press that and everything gets executed within that 1 button. If something goes wrong, it makes it much more difficult for you to find the problem and fix it. Okay, so separate your buttons rather. It's good programming practice. So you've got a button that does what? Do you need a button to, what did the first button do? The first button was to ask the user how many rows and columns, basically. Do you need to know that? No. But in addition to doing that, what did it do? It also resized the grid, it labeled the grid, and then it resized the arrays, which, do we need to resize any arrays? No, we don't. Do we need to resize the grid? No, we don't. Do we need to label the grid? Yes, we do. However, does it make sense that we start a program and then press a button and then it labels my grid? Does that make sense at all? No. So in other words, but you agree that we do want to label our grid, right? So where shall I put this code for labeling my grid? Any ideas? Okay, we've got someone in physical class that says something. Form, yes, on the form. But what about the form? The form is not an event. Form load, NT Makonazi. Good. Okay, so let's go back here and think, okay, fine. We don't need a button for labeling our grid. We will put the code in our form. We will have 1 button for input. Does that make sense? Okay, so we'll have a button for input. And then we also have a button for, let's copy this button. Let's put a second button. The second button will be for calculating, because once we have the input, we want to work out the total for our vaccine types. And then we're going to have another button for our total for days. And then we're going to have another button for our total, our average for our days. Does this make sense? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this UJ grid here. So I'm going to play around with it, but that's everything I need. So I'm going to try and drag it out here. Maybe what I'll do is I will try and align it a little like this so it's neat and tidy. Right, so that's professional looking-ish, okay? Cool. Right, now obviously I need to do the settings for this form. And so I'm going to start with the form, which I've selected. And all of you know how to do this already, but you get to watch me do it. So I'm going to call it form, and I'm going to call it VacMon, okay? Because it's the vaccination monitor. And over here in text, I'm going to call it the UJ vaccination monitor. Right, so there is my form setup. And just a quick question, because I've named my form, what else must I do? in order for this program to run. The minute I rename my form, because Visual Studio is broken, what do we have to do? Yes? Yeah, we have to specify the name of the form to our, so when we press play, it's going to tell us an error and we have to go into the code and we have to fix that form 1 to FRM VACMON. Right, okay, so we can do it now, then because we might as well get it done. So press start, and it says, obviously, would you like to continue and run the last successful board? The answer is no. Okay, and then we go and we click on this, and then it takes us here, and we change it from form 1 to FRM VACMON. Okay, and then the next thing you do is you save and you close this. You close this immediately, because if you accidentally keep on making changes to that, you will break your form. All right, you've experienced it. No, kind of. Okay, all right, so don't do that. In fact, you can do it anytime you want. Just don't do it during your semester test or exam. Okay, that is like career breaking for you. Okay, I just want to see if the online people are still alive. Name the designer. All right. Okay. Yeah. Something like that, I guess. I assume you mean name the designer means making that change. All right. So the other thing we have to do is we've got to go and change the names of our buttons. So the first button, be descriptive, is input data. Right. And we're going to call it BTN input. And then the next one is BTN calc T-tote, okay, so that's the type total. And then over here, you can go calc type totals, all right? And in this one here, I'm going to call calc day totals. And then this last one here is calc day averages, okay? Then obviously go back to the button names and rename them. BTN calc day av, and over here BTN calc day tots. Now, honestly, this is not very good. Oops, let's go back to our design. I am not a big fan of abbreviating these buttons because that's not very professional. So try and make it calculate. All right. The reason why I thought I'm going to make it calc is because I thought I'm going to be lazy. Okay, still working, but I want this is probably going to be the one that's going to cause a problem. Calculate J. No. Okay. Okay. Let me do this. So soon your buttons were like that size. Okay. Will you leave your button like that? No, I'm so glad this is like, that's a dumb question. You don't. Why not? What's wrong? I've got my buttons. I've named them. Just because you can't see doesn't mean, I think you all know, right? Your user's going to run the program and go, huh? Remember I told you earlier today, I said, whatever you do with your interface, it needs to be self-explanatory. A person must not look at that and go, whoa, what is this? Okay, why? Because you want your users to use this program. It doesn't matter if you wrote the most amazing program in the world, but nobody can figure out how to use it. Okay, so make sure that if you're going to label it, number one, make sure the descriptions are descriptive. But on top of it, make sure that it doesn't get cut off so you can't actually see what the whole message says. Okay, so over here, you'll see that I've got that. And sometimes, you know, you might struggle with the spacing, like, maybe you get that kind of spacing. Is that okay? Yeah, just tiny little, who cares? Okay, so we've got some people thinking it's who cares. Online people, do you care? Okay, you're not even answering. Your assistant is going to look at it and go, no, you can't have full marks. Why is that space there? Like, what's so special about calculate day average is that it must be on its own. Okay, so you're like, but I'm struggling. I really can't, like, now it's too much. Now it's too, So here's something you can do. So you can actually select all your controls. And by doing that, you can press Shift. And then as you press down, keep down the Shift key, you click on all the buttons that you want. And you can go to, I believe, Tools, Tools, hang on, Format. You go to Format. And over here, you will see that there are options to align it. So if you think anything is skewed, you can use the alignment. So let me like really mess this up. Like there, make it skew, make this higher up like this, okay? So what you can do is you can select all your buttons there and you can go to Format, you can go to Align and you can say align it so that it's centered, all right? And then the other thing you can do is you can say horizontal spacing, which is the other way around. So you go vertical spacing, and here you can see you can make it equal. And when you make it equal, that will be perfectly spaced, equally spaced, all right? So this is really important for you because I am pedantic and I will look at this and when I mark it, I will be like, no. And you don't want me to say no, you want me to go yes. So please take advantage of the Format command there because it's going to help you with a whole bunch of things. There's even one where you say, is this the center of my form? You can actually select a control and choose center and form and it will put it slap bang in the middle of your form. Okay, so if you're wondering, you're like, I don't know, I'm a bit skew with the art and it, there's no excuse. There's an option there. Right. Online people, let's see. Still unnamed the designer. Okay, I hope you're still there. Right, so I've named everything. I've named my controls. So remember, when you do a program, you drag all the controls onto the form, you name everything, and then you can start writing the code. So we're going to do that. Now, to get to form load, you all know that we must choose a form and we must double click. All right, and I'm actually going to close the Solution Explorer now so that we've got more space. And I am also going to increase the magnification to 150. Hopefully that will be visible to you all. Right, let's just check online people. Is it visible? Well, now it's not visible, obviously, but hopefully you can see it. Okay, so what's the very, very first thing you should technically do when you are writing this code? You go to the top, and for the semester test, you need to ensure that you've got option explicit on, option strict on, and option infer off, right? Okay, and afterwards, you would typically want to declare your variables. All right, now remember, earlier this morning, we said we needed 4 variables because there were 3 one-dimensional arrays and 1 two-dimensional array, all of which were dynamic. So you had to add in 2 additional integer variables that told you what the sizes of those dimensions were. But because we're working with single variables only, and which you have to do for your practical, which is the reason why you're not going to like this, is, and I want you to really learn to appreciate that arrays are your best friend, is you go, okay, let's start with the first array that we have, the 2-dimensional array, which was used to store the values of how many vaccinations on a certain day for a certain type of vaccine, right? Now, we've established that because we've got 4 days and 2 vaccines, we need a total of 8 elements in our 2-dimensional array. We're not working with arrays, so in other words, how many variables? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to teach you region, right? Variables. And what this does is when you type in region and then specify the name, you can actually declare an area for you to collapse and expand. Okay. Now what we're going to do here is we're going to declare our variables. So the first set of variables is our storage of vaccines per day per type. All right? And because we need 8, we are going to declare all 8 in here. So we go private, and then we have to say, and normally if we're working with single variables, you still want to name it in such a way you can immediately tell from looking at the array, a variable that this is for day 1 vaccine type 1. So I'm going to call it DT. Now DT for me means D is day and T is type, all right? I know, ooh, DT. You can call it whatever you want, but I want to call it DT. And then I'm going to say 1, 1, all right? What do you think DT11 means to me or to anybody who looks at it? This is the variable for storing how many vaccinations for day 1, type 1. And then, of course, I can go as integer. And then I would do this for 7 more times. But I can also be kind of lazy and then put in a comma to go, I am going to do it as DT11, DT12 to indicate it is type 2, all right? And then this is going to be my first row, and I will then type in private DT21, DT22 as integer, because that will represent the day 2 type 1, day 2 type 2, all right? And I will also then declare private DT31, DT32 as integer, private DT41, DT42 as integer. Can you actually squish all 8 in one line? Sure you can, all right? Nobody's stopping you from doing it. I just prefer to declare it this way because then I can visually, even looking at these declarations, I can visually see what this looks like on my UJ grid. Does this make sense? So this was a matter of style. Nobody says you have to do it the same way I do. Okay, let me check online to see if there's anything. Okay, please explain the option infer. And then Enchi Makanazi says infer forces you to declare your local variables exactly. All right. So is that all the variables I need? Is that it? Done? Yay. Over. Thank you. Let's move on. Because this is a lot of variables already. And the answer is no. You're right. It is not done. Because what do we still need to declare variables for? We need to declare variables for the total per vaccine type. We need to declare variables for the total per day. And we need to declare the averages per day. So we're going to do that now. We're going to say total per vaccine type. All right. So those are going to be my variables. We also need the total per day. And then we also need the average per day. We went through this exercise earlier this morning, but how many variables am I going to need for the total per vaccine type? We need 2, right? Because there are 2 types of vaccine. So I'm going to go VTT1, VTT2 as integer. Okay? So for me, VTT is vaccine type total 1, vaccine type total 2. You could have called it anything else, but the point is it would be an integer. You agree it would be an integer? Okay. All right. Then total per day, how many? Okay, first and foremost, we agree that it's an integer. The total per day will be an integer. How many total per day variables do we need? We need 4, right? Because there are 4 days. Does this make sense? Okay, so I'm going to go private DT1, DT2, DT3, DT4, 4 as integer. And then for the average per day, again, how many variables do we need there? 4 again, all right? And what type would they be? Would it be integer? It would be double, right? Because the minute we're working out with an average, we're dividing, and so it will be private DA1, DA2, DA3, DA4, for as double. Okay, and there, ladies and gentlemen, are my variable declarations. And the reason, and please note that regions are not something you have to do, right? So this is just like, I'm trying to show you something cool. Maybe you're like, it's not cool, but what's nice is then you can actually click on that little minus sign and hide it. All right, and maybe that's something cool, maybe that's not something cool, but it is sometimes helpful, especially if you have lots of code and you're writing and you're like scrolling up and down and you're trying to find something. Then the idea is you probably want to, you know, shrink your code so that you can focus on the code you need. All right, yes. Yeah, well, we did actually explain that. This was discussed in a previous lecture, and the online people basically said, yeah, NT Mukonazi says, info forces you to declare your local variables, but I'll show you it's in action now. All right. Okay, because it's easier for, I mean, NT Mukonazi says it forces you to declare it. So let me show you what is meant by that. All right. Okay, so I am going to expand my variables again because I have terrible memory, so I can't remember what I use, okay? But maybe not immediately. Personally, if I were writing the semester test, after I've declared my variables, before I even start writing any code, I am going to do the following. And that is, I am going to type in my own subroutine, and you know which subroutine I'm talking about. I have a grid on my form. I know it's going to be there. So I am going to create my subroutine for placing the results in my grid. Now you can call it whatever you want. So I'm going to call it WG now to mean right grid. Yeah, I can be very lazy. But the point is, please, nobody think that, oh, it needs to be this certain name and it can only be this name. Okay? Don't forget to put in by val. Even though if you don't remember to put it in, it is by val by default. Put it in because we are testing you on your programming. Okay, so is there someone out there that's going to point a gun at you and say, it better be row then column then text? No. You can put it as text, column, row if you want. Whatever you want, decide. But I can tell you now that it makes more sense for you to do it the way I'm doing it, which is row, then column, then text. Because when you do it that way, it's going to align so well when you place the things in your grid, from your grid to your UJ grid. Well, from your array to your UJ grid. The problem is we're not working with a UJ grid. We're not working with arrays today, but you might as well get into the habits of doing so. All right. So it's not a case of typing this subroutine just because exactly as this, because I tell you that's the way. It's a matter of you choose to do it because it makes your life easier when it comes to programming. Okay, so I am going to go by val R as integer, by val C as integer, and by val T as string. Let's enter. The name of my grid, remember, is days type. Row is equal to R, grid days type, dot co is equal to C. Remember, row singular, co singular, because sometimes when we're marking the semester test over the years, we find that people mess this up and they accidentally put in cols, put in rows, and then they can't understand why their program doesn't work. Be conscious of making that mistake here. So dot text is equal to T. You should by now actually be able to do this in your sleep. Okay, because it's boring. It's like row, column, text. Just write it down. Okay, so as I said, what we want to do is we actually want to label our UJ grid. Go to form load, maybe put a comment here and say label my UJ grid. Now, we could just go WG row 1, column 0, vaccination day 1. We could do that. And then we could go day 2, day 3, day 4. We could do this, we could. All right. But that's not good because you shouldn't be repeating code like this, right? Even if it's fixed, even if you know that there's exactly 4, you might as well copy and paste this. Because yes, it might be 4 here, but what if you had a problem where you had 50? Not a great idea, right? So where you have things like this, rather use the for loop. So you can still use the exact same code as in this morning's class where we worked with an array. So instead of doing this, let's do that. Let's go dim. And because we're working with vaccination types and days, I like to use the variables D and T rather than I and J or A or B and C or something, because I tend, this again, my personal preference, not enforcing it on you, but I'm telling you why I do it. When I use D and T as my local variables, I am doing so because then I know D is for days and T is for my vaccination types. And that will help me to keep track of when I'm using D, when I'm using T correctly. See, when you're working with your arrays later on, or when you're working with your UJ grid, you want to always keep track of what D represents and what T represents. If you use I and J, I was for, J was for, and you have to keep looking. So this is just my personal preference of choice. Now, earlier the question was, what does infer of actually do? Well, if I comment out option infer of, and I don't declare my local variables, right? Visual Studio is actually intelligent enough when you're only working in subroutines or functions, so smaller areas of coding, it can actually do the following. Okay, I'm going to try do this, but it's like, so, nope, it doesn't want to let me do it. In theory, if this was not forcing me to do this program, let me check my settings. Aha, that's why. Option infer by default is on, but it's on. So why is it doing this? Why is it moaning to me? Oh, okay. So in theory, now it's trying to prove me wrong. So in theory, what can happen is that you could work with a local variable here without indicating what type it is. And it would, because it's in a very small scope, it would be able to guess. This variable is for an integer. This variable is for a string. Okay, that's what it does. When option infer is on, it will infer. In other words, it looks at the code and goes, well, if you assign a string to this variable, obviously the variable is a string. Okay, so that's what option infer on does. It is able to figure it out for you. But that means you don't have to declare variables, and it also means that you don't have to be very strict and force yourself to use these variables correctly. And so that's not a great programming practice, especially when you're starting to program. And so let me show you. Okay, so for, like, let me give you, hopefully this example will work. For D is equal to 1 to 10. Okay, you see, I did not declare D as a local variable. For D equal to 1 to 10, it goes, we think D is an integer. And it's right. They're right to assume that D is an integer. But we don't want to do that. All right. Let me see if the online people are, okay, create account. I don't know what create a counter is there. Oh, you mean, yes, suggest create a counter so you can see it working. All right. So that's pretty much the example. Okay. Now, if I actually turned it off, there you go. It's running. See that? Because what is that D? Because you told me I can't guess. So now you better tell me what this is. And it's good. It's good. I know it's extra work for you, but remember, you're starting to program here. It's really good for you to engage in good programming practices, because the way Visual Studio is going, if they have it their way, you don't have to do anything. They will do everything for you. To which you say, well, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with that is, who is going to take responsibility when the code goes wrong? Right? What are you being paid to do? You're being paid to write code. Yet you go, Visual Studio did everything. Then what are you here for? Okay. Visual Studio is trying to cater to as many people as possible, including non-programmers. But at the end of the day, you're the one that studies towards a professional degree. You should know what's happening behind the scenes. Okay, so I'm going to re-enable my D, all right? And remember with the for next loop, the problem is they also don't put the next D, and for readability, put your D's and T's and all that at the end. Right, okay. So over here for D is 1, 2, and obviously it's not 10, it is 1, 2, 4. You will say WG, and then you say D0 vaccination day ampersand C string D. So that is for my date. And after that, you would have WG, VG, and then it would be row 5, all right, column 0, and you put the total there. Afterwards, you will have another for next loop for T is equal to 1, 2, 2, and this is like really silly. So some of you might think, really? Like, I'm going to put in 2 labels manually. You're telling me to write a for loop for 3 lines. I know, it's a bit silly, but let's assume let's get into the practice of doing it, okay? So we're going to go, but you see what I'm saying? It is kind of silly if you're going to, for 2 lines, replace 2 lines with 3 lines and a for loop, just so that you can write a for loop. Does this make sense? Okay, but let's be honest, you are not going to work with things like this. You're going to work more with a dynamic environment. But in theory, you could have just done it manually like this. Okay, so 0, and then T, and then we say type. And then you put in WG, and then this would be row 0, and it would be 3 total. Then the next one is 4 average. I'm going to press the start button and give it a bash, because we want to see if our and then you're like, what happened there? No. And ladies and gentlemen, so okay, the online people haven't even noticed this. So here's something I thought was very strange as well when I did this. And that is, with the new technologies, with Visual Studio and so on, your rows actually, what you drag onto your form might not be what you see here. And it's to do with the resolution. So when you've got a situation like this, the only thing you can really do is, through trial and error, play with your form until you get it right. I know, not ideal. Okay, so still 1 more row, about 1 more row's worth. Let's see. But you know what? On this screen, now too much. On this screen, it looks like this. When you use it on another computer, chances are it's going to be a different size as well. So the assistants have been told, listen, this might be a thing. Don't be too strict on it. Obviously, if you do it ridiculously, like you have this huge, wide screen, then it's like, no. Okay, so let me reduce it slightly more. And then obviously I need to make this wider. And try. Oh, too wide now. Okay. This is fine. Let's see. Yeah, pretty much. Okay, so more or less like that. I'm gonna have to keep it like that. I'll take it. Okay, so maybe now with your buttons you want to make it bigger. So here's the other thing I wanted to show you. You can go to format and you can make it the same height. All right. If you do this, so you make that and make it a little higher, maybe slightly there. Okay, so it's a bit higher now. And then you go to format and you say make it the same height. Ta-da! And then go to format again, go to vertical spacing, make equal. There we go. Right, so there we go. I've labeled everything as is, and it's fixed size. So check. Still create a counter. Okay, no questions beyond that. Okay, let's press stop now. So we've done our user interface and we're happy as can be. Let's start writing the code for inputting the information. So I double click on the input data, and one thing I hate is that double clicking on these, it just creates subroutines in the middle of nowhere. I'm gonna double click on all these buttons now so that it creates those containers, and then I'm gonna move them. Okay, so move them, move that there. Another thing I would suggest that you do, ladies and gentlemen, for your semester test is please try and organize the order of your code in the order of how your questions are going to be asked. Okay, or rather, how you're going to execute the code. Okay, I know that VB will be intelligent enough to jump back and forth and tell you where, but think of someone marking. If you were looking at this code and you have to first go, okay, I'm marking your input, where is it, and then you look. How would you feel about that, having to look for code? Would you be like, oh, finally found it after 5 minutes. I'm in a great mood. Okay, no. So I would say, personally, I would, after I've written all the code, I would move it around. So I would say this form load is higher up because it's the first thing that gets executed. So I'll put that, say, up here. I would also, then I would do input. Input is next. Then I would calculate my vaccine type total. So there's the type total. And then I would calc the day totals. And then I would have the average calculations. Okay, so there I've basically ordered everything in one go. And then I can leave the subroutine at the end. Right, let's see. Anybody else? Still create a counter. I hope you're still online, people. Are you there? You? I don't know anymore. Wi-Fi, are you working? Great, thank you. Okay, let's go. Clearly the online people don't have questions. Input. Now, how many of you were very happy when you realized, when I work with an array, I can loop the code for entering how many what's in what? Yes, you were happy. Now we're working with a single variable. Uh-oh. How does that work? Are you ready? I've rolled up my sleeve, online people, because you can't see me do it. Okay, so obviously I'm going to shrink this so that I can see the variables in front of me. I'm just reminding myself, what are my variable names? DT11, DT12, DT blah, blah. Okay, let's go. DT11 is equal to cint input box. How many vaccinations for day 1, type 1? Then you need to do it for DT12. Then you need to do it for 2-1. So vaccination day 2, type 1. DT22, vaccination day 2, type 2. And you need to do it for 3-1, 3-2, 4-1, 4-2, 4-4-3-3. Let's see what the online people are saying. Thank God for copy and paste. Well, it's fine because there were only 8. What if there were 12? What if there were 50? Who's going to cry? Exactly. So you all realize how in single variables suck. Okay, but now we're not done. When you're copying and pasting, what are the chances that you miss one? And then your code doesn't work. Yes. So in other words, you really don't want to do in single variables. But Mr. Lebier is he's a masochist of some sort. And no, he's not a masochist, he's a sadist. You're the one suffering. I always get it wrong. Okay. So you're all gonna have to suffer. Now, after you've entered the values into the variables, what do you need to do? Oh, you need to display it. Right. So fine, display it. So after you enter that, you go WG11 C string DT11. And again, we're going to do it for the second one and the third one, fourth one, fifth one, da-da. Okay, and obviously you have to change it to. Now, the reason why I name my variables the way I do, 4, 2, 4, 2. 4, 1, 4, 1. How is it that I'm able to do it so quickly? It's my naming convention. My naming convention is helping me, right? Can you see that if it's 3, 2, it would be 3, 2, 3, 2. Okay, it's not a coincidence that it is this easy. It's because I've chosen to write my WG subroutine to specify the row first, then the column. And the way I've named my variables is row first, column second. So it matches, it aligns. And every time you've got that, do you see how this makes your life easier? You're convinced. Okay. I'm not sure the online people are convinced. Online people, are you convinced? No response. I think they've been overwhelmed by, okay, this one person. Okay, 2, 2 there, 2, 2, 2, 2. Right over here, you see it's DT21, so it's 2, 1, 2, 1. 1, 2, so you put that 1, 2, 1, 2. Right, today I'm done. And obviously because, I'm going to test this program quickly to see that I've got it right. So over here, let's run input data, vaccinations for day 1, type 1. Let's say 6. 6, okay. 9, 10, 3. Okay, looking good so far. 5, 9, 1, 4. The reason why I want to test it is because I want to make sure that I did write the code correctly and it's mapping to the correct places. So everything good. So now obviously I have to work out the total, and averages. So let's go to the button for calculating the total for each type. Now, how do I calculate the total for each type? So let's minimize this one here as well now, so that we are looking at our code. If we want to work out the total for each type, technically, what do? I would take that plus that plus that plus that to get my total. See why I deliberately declared my variables the same way as I declared my grid, because you can see visually to get the total, it's those 4 values added together, and then for the second one, it is those 4 values added together. Does this make sense? Okay, so that one's pretty straightforward. So in calc, you go it's VTT. I think it's VTT1 is equal to DT1 1 plus DT21 plus DT31 plus DT41. And if you're wondering why, because remember I told you I looked at this and I said it's add those 4 for the first type, and then it's add those 4 for the second type. Right, so when I press enter, I will now also want to display it. So I go WG, and this would be row 5, column 1, C string VT11. VTT1. There we go. And then VTT2 is equal to DT21 plus not 21, DT12 plus DT22 plus DT32 plus DT42. And then again, WG5, still row 5, but now column 2, C string VTT2. Okay, so done. That's the total. Right. Now, if we want to work out the total, and you notice that these turn dark black here, I'm using high contrast mode in this view. Hopefully this means it's easier for you all to see as well. All right, so these ones you notice are lighter in color, whereas those have turned black. What's the difference between the ones that have turned black and the one that's lighter in color? We haven't used the variables that are lighter in color yet. That's what it's trying to warn you about. Okay. So let's do DT11, DT1, DT2, DT3, DT4. How do we do that? We know it's add those 2 to get DT1. It's add those 2 to get DT2, add those 2 to get DT3, and those 2 to add DT4. All right. And again, each of them you would have to add up. So over here, we can say DT1 is equal to, no, not DT1. Sorry, hang on. DT1, then against DT11. Okay, right. DT1 is equal to DT11 plus DT12. Right, and then you go WG, and this would be row 1, column 3, C string DT1. Make sense? And then I'm going to copy and paste this. Do that for day 2, day 3, day 4. Obviously, then this is 4, row 3, row 2, and DT2 is equal to day 2, type 1, day 2, day 2, type 2. Change that to 2. DT3 is equal to DT31, DT32. By the way, you should know that copying and pasting is bad for you. I shouldn't be doing it either. But this should just show you why we hate single variables, all right? Because think about it this way. If I weren't paying attention, which I really am actually not really paying fully attention because I'm speaking to you and teaching and multitasking, so many things can go so wrong here. Okay, over there, and I think I've covered everything. Online people, are you still good? Yes, hopefully. Well, that's an old yes, but still. All right, and then I'm going to do the last one. Now, the last one is basically DA1. DA1 is equal to DT1 divided by 2. Does this make sense? Because you would always divide by 2 because you added 2 numbers together. Okay, and DA2 is equal to DT2 divided by 2. DA3 is equal to DT3 divided by 2. DA4 is equal to DT4 divided by 2. I mean, Very repetitive. And then after that, you go WG, and now you're going to have to think it's row 1, column 4, and then you want to display C string DA1. Okay, and then obviously you have to change that from row 2, row 3, row 4, but it's still column 4, and DA4, DA3, DA2. Okay, so before I hit the run button, I just want to see online if still old yes, everything is still okay. I'm going to press the start button. There may be some errors here because I wasn't paying attention, so let's do this. So 5, 8, 9, 10, 54 all of a sudden, 8, 12, 10. Okay. So when I calculate the type totals, I get 80 and 36. Maybe, maybe not. Looks right. Okay. When I calculate the day totals, I get that. Also looks right. Then I calculate the day averages, and I also get averages, which kind of look right, maybe. Okay, now what I want to actually show you before I say bye-bye, and yes, that's the end of today's tutorial because I don't know what else I must teach you. But please feel free to ask because you paid for this time. I would not dream of cheating you of your precious, precious time. But you do realize that I basically did this in an hour, in 7 minutes. Now, this is not what we expect you to do in a semester test. You have 3 hours to do it. It can be done because I also wasted all this time explaining things to you. But it will only work well for you if you know right from the get-go what must be done. Okay? So in the beginning, when you get that question, please don't panic. Read through the question carefully and figure out what your strategy and what is required in each of these places. At the end of the day, we're asking you to work out totals and averages all the time. There may be a special formula every now and then where we go, what you must do is add these two numbers and divide it by another number. Oh, wow. But it's not like you can't do it. The trick is knowing how to declare your variables, when to use a for loop, when to use, well, you'll never get this. But the point is when to use the for loop correctly. Okay. Before I let you all run off, I want to show you something that will be useful to you, like really useful. And that is, what if this was money? In other words, the final column here, average, you're supposed to display money. Would 9.5 be a good way to represent money? No. What should it look like instead? It should say 9.50. Does that make sense? 9 Rand 50, not 9.5. And then 31 should not just say 31, it should say 31.00. Okay, and that is possible to do. But you cannot do it using the C string command because C string doesn't actually know how you want this to be done. And we're going to revisit a very interesting command that you've already been using, but just for different purposes. That is, remember when you went to your design and we were all playing around with these buttons, we used the format command because the format command is effectively meant to help you with formatting. In other words, make it look nice. And we're not going to use the format menu here because this is really only for your design. You are going to use the format command here in your code. All right. So how do we do that? Well, first and foremost, you want to make sure, sorry, I just want to check online people, are you still okay? All right. Are you interested in the format command? Good. Let's go. So how the format command works is that instead of using C string, and it's really important that you're hearing me here, instead of using C string, in other words, you can't go C string and format at the same time. It's not that you can't. It's more a case of someone, you're kicking a person while they're down, pretty much. Okay? So you're like, work it out. No, really, work it out again. Okay? Because format will return a string. What does your subroutine require? An integer, and then a string. Does it make sense for you, knowing that format will return a string, that you go format but also C string it? No. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of the C string command. Instead, I'm going to replace it with the command format. Told you VB was very straightforward. You want to format the string, so use the format command. Now, when we were busy working with the design, could I just click on a button and say format? No. I needed to tell it how to format it, right? You can't just go, make it pretty. They'll go, how do you want me to make it pretty? Remember, there was, do I want to align it? Do I want to make it the same size? Do I want to make it evenly spaced? Do I want to make it, etc., etc.? So the same thing happens when you use the format command here. The format command says, okay, what do you want me to format? So you go, this number here. This number, which happens to be a double. All right, I want you to take this number and I want you to format it. So it goes, okay, I'll take this number and I'll turn it into a string. But it's more important, but then that's the same as a C string. So what else do you need to do? And that is, after you go DA1, you need to put comma to indicate it is this value that I'm giving to you, but I also want to provide you additional information as to how I want you to format it, so that you know how to fix it for me, okay? And so the next thing, after the format command, you put a comma, and then you need to specify what we call a string pattern, okay? So you're going to provide a string here, and the string is, you now need to learn how the pattern works. So I'm going to introduce to you two different things that you need to know for pattern-wise when it comes to numbers. The first is the 0, all right? The 0 indicates that the number must be there. Okay, so to give you an idea, an example, it means that if the value is 0, you will display 0. All right? So I am now going to put in 0, 0, and I'm going to put a dot in front. Okay. The dot means to tell me that this is a decimal place with 0, 0 at the back. Okay. Now I'm going to replace the second one, C string, with format as well, but I'm going to use a different pattern. And this one I'm going to go hash, hash. Right. Hashes means that the number is optional. So in other words, if the value is 0, it will then not display it. Okay? And I'm going to do the same with format, D3, and then I'm going to mix it up, and I'm going to say dot 0 hash. Okay? And over here, I'm going to use format, and I'm going to do it dot 0, 0 the same, right? So the same as the first one. So these two will give the same pattern. These two will give possibly different values. All right. Online people? It's very silent. Okay, I'm going to press the start button. And because this is, the average is a result of an answer from, I am going to input data in such a way that I go 0, 0, 0, 0, maybe 1 here, 0, 0, 0. Okay, right. Obviously, I don't really have to click calculate type totals. Yeah, I can jump straight there. Okay, what can you tell me from this pattern here? So let's look at that. So there were my patterns. There's my results. What can you tell me from the guess? Okay, I've already explained to you. I say if you put a 0 there, if it's 0, it will display this. Even if there's no 0, it will still display the 0. Okay? So you agree that the total 0 gives you an average of 0. So because it's 0, it will still insist that it's 0.00. Does this make sense? We don't care if it's 0. You will display 0 there. Now we want to use 0.00 for currency, because it means that if it was 5 Rand and 50 cents, it would go 5.50 rather than 5.5. Does this make sense? Okay. The second one, you see that it gives the same 0. It's 0, but because it's hash hash, it means that if it's 0, you don't have to display it. And that's exactly what it did. It didn't display anything. Now, is that a good thing to have when you're displaying results? If you're a user and you're looking at that, what would you immediately think? Something's broken. It's not showing an answer. Does this make sense? Now, when I mixed it up and I said 0 hash, that just means that you must show at least up to 1 decimal place, even if it's 0. But if the value afterwards is a 0, you don't have to display it. Okay, and then the last one is the same as the first one, so same. Right, yes.
How come for the third one it doesn't have the 0.5?
Because 0.5, so 0.5 is the first decimal place, right? So remember the zero actually means show a number there. If it's 0, still show a number. So whatever number it is, you must show it. If it's a hash would be, if it's 1 to 9, show it. But if it's 0, you don't have to show it. Okay, so let me do the input data again to give you an example. Let's say 9. So then this will give you 4.5, okay? Let's just give 0 for the other ones. Okay. Right, you see that? So 4.5, because 9 gives you 4.5, because it's 0, it says, okay, 5 is there, so display it. Now what comes after after the 5 is 0. But because it's 0, you have to display 4.5. So in the next one, you see that it's only 10, and there's actually, it's 10.00. So it will not display the 0.00. And then obviously the last two, 0 and 0.00. Because remember, this one is, the answer is 0, but it was displayed 0, and then whatever's afterwards is still 0. So the hash says, if it's 0, we're not going to display. So basically, it boils down to this. Hash is, if it is a 0, they won't display it. 0 is, I don't care if it's 0, you will display it. Okay, does that make sense? I think maybe, hopefully I haven't confused the online people. What would happen if you say hash 0? Okay, let's hang on. Let's go there. It's a good question. So let's do that. So let's change the last one to hash 0. Okay? Let's hope it's intelligent enough. Okay, so you can see that if it's hash 0, it will realize, well, if there's going to be a 0 at the end, you can't leave the middle one blank. All right. That is a weird pattern. Right, now you notice that it just goes 0.0. But you're like, I don't want 0.0, I want to at least say 0.00. Okay, what do you think you must do if you want to insist that it must be 0.00 at least for currency? You would put in 0.00. Okay. So we input data again. 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1. Let's make that 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1. 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1. 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0 There we go. So it at least shows the 0. Right. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that's really all I want to show you. Thank you very much. I think I'm going to stop sharing the screen. Okay, are there any other questions that you might have before I dismiss you all? Oh, goodbye already. Oh, someone's already jumped off the online people. Goodbye. Thanks. Okay. Well, fine. I'll go mark test. All right. But if you have questions, you can please come down and ask. I'm going to stop this recording now. Goodbye, people.